Alright, welcome back to part 2 of this second video. I've got a Good Folk IPA. I've reviewed it a couple of times. It was in my top 3 2 years ago. I'm not going to go into too much detail of what it tastes like, if it pairs well with a cigar. I'm just going to get straight back into reading. Hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm really enjoying this style content and also the book itself, and finding out a little bit more about Bill. That's a great beer. For the price of just one of those luxury cars, Lara and I could have put a deposit on a home and gotten ourselves out of a precarious housing. It was a real kick in the guts to go from scrubbing a Mercedes to counting our change in the supermarket and realising we could afford nappies for our baby or food, but not both. One day I snapped. That's in the way of my face. I decided it was time to improve our financial situation. I crept out late at night, leaving Lara and our baby fast asleep. I walked the streets of the suburbs of Ashmore. I noticed a man and a woman getting into a car parked in the driveway of a luxury home. They drove away, leaving the house unattended. They were dressed fancy for a long night out, and it was at that moment I knew my target. As I waited for the car to disappear down the street, I scanned the neighbours' houses for activity. There was nothing that gave me any cause for alarm. No lights or evening strollers. The only dog I could hear barking was at least 10 houses away. First I tried to the garage door, locked. The front door was locked too, and was the back door. But from the backyard I noticed a bathroom window that wasn't shut properly. Climbed through and gained my composure, then took some time exploring my new surroundings. The first target was the master bedroom. As I opened a large mirrored wardrobe, I could see a variety of men and women's clothing all hanging in a neat row. Below the clothes were expensive looking shoes, more women's than men's, and all high quality brands. I started looking inside the jackets, handbags, purses for valuables, but found nothing. Then I looked above the clothes and noticed a number of hats. Under one of the hats was a small bag. Inside the bag were 3 rolls of banknotes. I quickly counted about $4,000. I took half and left half, bundling it as I found it. $2,000 was life-changing amount of money, and I figured the theft would be less likely to be noticed in a hurry. I also found a small bag of powder and a pipe, something that didn't interest me. So I put the bag back where I found it, closed the wardrobe, and left the way I came in. As I walked back to Lara and Bub and started to have regrets, not about crossing the line into burglary, but for not going further. Maybe I should have taken a lot. What was another $2,000 to a couple of rich junkies when I had a hungry baby at home? F me, I was confused. Often stopping along the way, thinking about going back, but with every step closer to home, I knew I had all I needed. When I arrived back at the caravan park, Lara and Bub were fast asleep, none the wiser. It was only 3 years later that I would confess to Lara what I had done that night. I usually stole because my life depended on it. Or I needed food or a roof over my head and clothing, but I always knew karma would one day come knocking, because these memories were a burden. More and more as life went on, and especially since my 30s, I've tried to pay it forward by helping people whenever I can, and found some of those I hurt and stole from and paid them back in full. As I experienced PI, it was easy enough for me to track people down and pay them back in both money and sincere apologies. There's no judgment here because obviously having a wife and kids, like I said, I've nearly been bankrupt on 3 different occasions. And every time just before it was like doomsday, and I can't tell you the amount of stress and anxiety all that shit caused, you know, of like, if something doesn't happen in the next week, like, you know, do you go missing and all of a sudden you're on a street somewhere with no home, no nothing, no job, blah, blah, blah. And I never had any forms of addiction or any form of, you know, but I could have been that person. I could have been that person outside Woolworths, you know, begging for cash. And so you don't know what lengths someone will go to. You know, had people not helped me to pay it forward with that car for the Lismore person, you know, I probably would have felt guilt and shame, not being able to pay the rent at my dad's investment property. And we came from a poor background, so it's not like, you know, he was loaded up and he was going to be able to pull me out of a financial mess. You know, he probably would have had to sell it, and then, which he eventually did when he couldn't work anymore because of his illness. But I don't know, would I have told him? Maybe not, you know. And at that stage, like, I'd split up with my wife at that time. Maybe I would have just been too ashamed of anything, and maybe I just go missing. Who knows? Because that was very much on the cards. So, you don't know what you don't know what you would do in certain situations had things have gotten worse. So anyway, I continue. Where am I? While it's no secret, I've hunted down and confronted those who have hurt me. It's coming face to face with those I hurt that I've found the most difficult. It's not the easiest to find a random couple who have moved houses several times in the intervening years, knock on their door and politely say, "Hello, I'm very sorry, but when I was younger, I stole half of your drug money to feed my baby." So it took time to find and repay everyone I could remember stealing from. Eventually, I settled the whole ledger, except for one who continued to elude me. So before I continue, you know, it just shows what of a man Bill is, because if you didn't have a conscience and you were actually a horrible person, you wouldn't even be thinking of this. You wouldn't even be trying to go back and right the wrongs. You know what I mean? You'd just been like, oh, stole 2,000. Who gives a shit, you know? But the fact that obviously impacted him in some way to then track them down to repay them, like, that obviously speaks about character. So when I was just 16 years old, I stole $5,000 in cash from a wealthy schoolmate, Anthony. I drained his account via a bug in the ATM's withdrawal system. Anthony was a rich kid with a rich kid's naivety, and even though I really liked him, I took advantage of that. Anthony and his parents knew it was me all along, but the police couldn't charge me because there was no evidence. They had no idea how a snotty-nosed street kid was capable of stealing money from an ATM, and I wasn't about to tell them. At the time, I was proud of a fairly sophisticated system that had worked out to hack. and steal from ATMs. As time passed, that pride turned into something closer to shame. Just want to see how many more pages there is. Yeah, I might read the whole lot. It would be years before I tried to find Anthony, and when I did, it wasn't easy. During my searches, I stumbled upon his son. He told me Anthony had succumbed to brain cancer some 10 years earlier. I told his son that what I was hoping to achieve, and that I wanted to pay him the money back in full, which rightfully belonged to his family. While he was sympathetic and understanding, I could tell he was also somewhat disappointed that a friend had taken advantage of his dad. I didn't ask for his forgiveness. With Anthony dead, it was too late to seek his forgiveness for what I'd done. The only person in the equation who could forgive me was me. That's the only way to really cleanse yourself of that kind of guilt. Finding a way for self-forgiveness. It provided a cleansing and solace in my life, even if it only happened much later on. That's what I'd hoped to pass on to Philip. When we closed his case, self-forgiveness, solace, it's a powerful and in many ways in the opposite of revenge. I think it helped me become a better person. As the Coffin Confessor, I work with people who are, if they're not already so frail and confused, they would be easy to take advantage of. I have the opportunity to steal from those who depend on me or those who have already stepped through death's door, but the thought of doing so has never entered my mind. I get paid very well for what I do, and my integrity is everything. While I might be an atheist, I am somewhat spiritual, and even I know stealing from the dead is as bad as it gets. Karma is one mean lady, and now that I'm a little wiser, I don't F around with her. Although I have a policy of offering my service to anyone who needs them regardless of my own moral stance. There's certain lines I will not cross. I don't break the law, especially not if someone is watching. And I always act in a way that is going to settle karma instead of kicking it up. I once said I would never refuse a request from the dying, but this wasn't a request from someone who was dying, nor was she terminally ill or even poor. Jill, a middle-aged woman, was due to attend her father's funeral in the coming days. Wanted to expose the man for who he really was. Jill told me she'd been raped and molested by her father. Every time she tried to speak about it, she would shake uncontrollably. She wouldn't dare stand up and expose him for a monster he was, especially at his funeral. But she knew what I was capable of. She also knew that I was an abuse survivor myself. I had skin in the game, and always tried to name, shame, and bring abusers to justice. Well, you'd be proud of me, Bill, because whilst I decided not to go to the police with my own abuse, because my abuser's already gotten away with two horrific things. Won't go into the first one because it's not my story to tell. Second one being on the SO registry, fraudulently getting a working with children's check, was caught out and got another slap on the wrist. So I decided, even though it would probably go to court, I'd probably pay a shitload of money, and he'd probably get another slap on the wrist, and I'd be out of pocket. So instead, I shared my story with the world, and now pretty much everyone knows what a piece of shit he is. Didn't come without cost, though. Didn't come without cost for me. Happy families and all that jazz, you know. But I don't regret it for a second. And that man, he's not even a man, but he's a monster. Karma hasn't hit him, and if it hasn't hit him this lifetime, it will in the next. Because even though you say you're atheist, Bill, I believe in an afterlife. I believe we get it reincarnated. And yeah, I do believe that if he doesn't get any karma in this life, he's going to have a pretty shit life next lifetime. That's for sure. But I do believe he will. I do believe he will. I already have a scenario that I think about most weeks, and I'm just waiting for it to come to fruition. So, anyway. However, as a private investigator, I needed to know the facts. Jill's case was no different. She had my sympathies. She was clearly troubled, but just telling me she was and molested by her father wasn't enough for me to crash his funeral and rain down the collateral damage that it would bring to her family. I understand what it's like to be a victim of child abuse. I was abused at home and school from the age of 7. That's when my abuse started, at 7 to 14. And even though the sexual abuse stopped at 14 because I became older and more stronger than my abuser, the psychological manipulation, drama, and chaos, things getting stolen, losing my own mind over things that, because of things that this person had done or created or tried to evade or whatever. Yeah, but it all started at 7. I shouted my abuse from the rooftops, but no one listened. They called me a liar. But I wouldn't allow myself to live in silence. But I understand why so many victims do until they meet someone who sets an example of how to speak up. Fear was a way of stopping us from having fun, taking a leap of faith, jumping out of the aeroplane, and even exposing those who hurt and tormented us. It's a fear that keeps most victims silent. Fear of being called a liar or being ridiculed, ostracized, but not me. I lived in fear my whole childhood, and I have no fear left. And there's nothing more dangerous than a person who has no fear. No matter how big or small they are, the fearless will always win. The night before my 8th birthday, my grandfather sexually attacked me. The next morning, I was given a bike, and my mother hit me with a kettle cord because I didn't show any gratification or love towards my grandfather who bought it for me. Jesus. That was the day fear found me. It took 9 years of being continually abused, not only by him, but my teachers at school, until fear finally left, and I confronted him about it. I nearly killed him, but stopped right on the precipice. On that day, I lost the ability to feel fear, but when those lose fear, you lose the ability to care, and on occasions, the ability to know when to stop. Caution is something I had to learn, and I knew enough to use it there. So, I stopped going to Christmases with my family, and I spent most of my Christmases with my then wife, which I wouldn't say I have a lot of regret over that, because I didn't speak about my abuse until I was 27. I was silent on that for that long. But I look on all the Christmases I wasted of not spending time with my dad, and now my dad's not here. And I feel somewhat annoyed and frustrated more than regret that person was able to dictate my ability to spend time with someone that I loved and cherished. Yeah. And yeah, when he says ability to know when to stop, like, it's funny. People in my family do want me to play happy families, but it's like, you put me in the same room with him and I'll probably end up in jail. Then we just fix the label on that cigar, and that might be my last little segue of my own stuff, because I keep getting sidetracked, and it's going to be another bloody hour-long video if I don't pull my head in. This is somewhat cathartic for me, so I appreciate this book, Bill. Because I'm sympathising, I'm empathising, I'm reflecting. I'm getting some thoughts out that I normally wouldn't. Alright, where was I? Caution is something I had to learn and knew enough to use it here. I investigated Jill's claims and got to know her father as best I could without ever setting eyes on him. He was too far gone for me to interview him, so I did a thorough background check, canvassing official records, every paper trail, and every person I could find to get a read on that man. To be honest, I couldn't find anything that made me think Jill's allegations were credible. I couldn't find any criminal record or anything that led me to factual evidence. Jill had no health records to support her claims, no GP visits, no rape kits, no history of seeing mental health professionals about their abuse. None of this made for conclusive evidence. Plenty of victims can't produce evidence of their abuse, which is part of the reason they stay silent, 100%. But I said I wouldn't go more into my stuff, so I'll continue. Despite a thorough investigation, the worst thing I could find about Jill's father was that there was a masochist and frequent a dominatrix who would punish him and tell him all types of shit that got him off sexually. Personally, it's not something I've ever explored. The last thing I'd want is to stand naked in front of a woman and be punished, bashed, or attacked, but each to their own. So that was it, a fairly harmless secret kink between consensual adults, probably something he should have had a conversation with his wife about, but no proof of abuse. It was finally time to sit down with Jill and have a difficult conversation. I told her without solid proof of allegations, I couldn't in good conscience take her on as a client unless her father himself hired me. That would have been horrible. Based on what you had gone through, to then, she was upset, but she didn't argue. My read on the situation was that while Jill clearly had suffered some kind of trauma, she was, as she entered, fabricating the allegations against her father. Why, I'll never know. She clearly had a lot going on mentally, more than I could reasonably help her with, and so I wished her well and went on my way. Some clients feel I'm not working in their best interests, giving I'll expose secrets and lies. A lot of time these are told by the client as a means to win my sympathy. 9 times out of 10, if a client hires me to expose some wrongdoing in their life, it started with something effed up that they did to a person who wronged them long ago. I'm thorough and I won't leave a stone unturned, even if that means upsetting the very person who engaged my services. Sometimes I feel bad that I have turned down an upset and potential client, but I'm never surprised when someone full of righteous anger turns out to have more skeletons in the closet than they let on. I might leave it there. There's more pages of this paid in full. So, yeah, I might just leave it there. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow. I suppose where I'll leave it, all right, coming from my own experiences here, if you're too scared to speak up anyway. If you're scared no one will believe you, does that even matter at the end of the day? If you're scared of people that care for you coming out of your life, are those the sorts of people that you want in your life in the future to begin with? And whilst it may hurt, who are you protecting? You know, at the end of the day, I think what's more important is that you protect yourself. And that isn't by staying silent. Because to some degree, staying silent does so much damage. So much internal damage and external damage from the internal damage. So you might feel like you're protecting yourself, but are you really? History would suggest with my own stuff, the answer would be no. Because the amount of damage that I created for myself and also others, and I hurt a lot of people, you know, being sexually abused by a male and by a brother for 7 years, and keeping that quiet, you know, that made me do certain unhealed parts of that, made me do certain things that I shouldn't have, made me hurt certain people that I shouldn't have, and that sits on me every day. You know, those things don't leave you. And then the people you hurt, the hurt that you created, don't leave those people either. You know, so at the back to what I was saying, who you're protecting, because you're not protecting yourself. You're just hurting yourself even further. And that little boy or girl inside of you, at the time of when you were that little boy or girl, you couldn't protect them, and other people weren't protecting you, is you have a right to protect that inner child within you. So I'll just leave it there.